you guys! So a while back I asked for some questions for a Q&A and I'm finally doing the Q&A. The Comics Manifesto asks how many hour per page. I'm assuming they're meaning comic pages. If you didn't know, I do have a little comic that I've been working on. And I guess around 8. This is Kaduyu, and they ask, what sort of paper do you recommend for using watercolors for the first time? I go with this gigantic Canson, oh this is all backwards, but this is a Canson watercolor block, and it's just a little bit cheaper than the pages that you buy individually, but I find it to be a pretty good quality. It handles water really well. I've noticed it has maybe like a touch more texture than like the sheets that you buy individually, but I like this just because if I mess something up, I don't feel bad. Emma Barstow from Twitter, she asks, where do you get your inspiration to draw? How did you get to where you are today? Are you self-taught or did you go to an art school? So I'm going to start with the last one of her question. It wasn't technically an art school. I went to BYU, Idaho, and they had a really fun little art program. How did you get to where you are today? This is kind of story time, but I started drawing when I was young. I think most people do. And I distinctly remember in first grade there was some kid who put like all these details into his drawings, and I didn't do that, so I felt like I wasn't a good artist. I don't know, I never really felt like I was a good artist, but I just like loved painting and I loved drawing, more drawing when I was younger. And so when it came to go to school, my parents were kind of like, you have to go to college, you're not gonna not do this. And I was like, I hate school. I'm dyslexic, and so like school, math, all of that, I am not good at it. What am I like kind of good at? I was like, well, I like drawing. So I started in the art program. I actually didn't understand what an illustrator was at that time. And people would ask me, are you going into fine arts or are you going into illustration? I was like, what's the difference? We were doing, what are they called? Still lifes. We were doing still lifes. That's what they're called. And I had like kind of told a story with my still life, and he's like, that's what illustrators do. They tell stories with their art. So I was like, okay, I'm going to be an illustrator. And so that's kind of what happened through school. I graduated with my BFA, as I said, from BYU, Idaho. And afterwards, I've just been kind of stumbling away. I think that's one of the hard things about being an illustrator is there's no defined path. There's not a silver bullet. So I've just been kind of doing my social media and making art all the time, and that's how I've gotten to where I am right now. Emma Barstow also asks, where do you get your inspiration to draw? And I get a lot of my inspiration from nature and from animals, and also from all the geeky stuff that I do, like Dungeons and Dragons and Harry Potter and Lord of the Rings. I love all those things, and I get a lot of inspirations from that. V. Lee Art asks, what's your favorite subject to illustrate and why? I love drawing animals because they're cute and they're fluffy. I like them. The Drawny on Twitter asks, do you mainly use watercolors, pan or liquid, or also gouache and ink? Would you recommend using masking liquid? I use mainly watercolors. I sometimes work in gouache, but mostly watercolors and ink. I use ink with almost everything that I do. And would I recommend using masking fluid? I don't use it because I don't know how. It always tears my paper, and I don't know if that's because I bought my masking fluid like a decade ago and I'm still trying to use it, so maybe that's my problem, but other people use it really well, and it's really cool. So yeah, I recommend it, but I don't know how to use it properly, so I don't use it. J Grave Art asks, When learning slash trying out a new material or technique, what is your first step? Do you research slash plan it out much or jump right in? I usually just jump right in. Hills Fantastic asks, what is your process for coming up with ideas? I don't know if I have a formal process. I come up with my ideas just from books I read, nature, from animals, as I mentioned earlier, and then I just kind of draw them out. However, when I do get an idea, I like to write it all down and make sure that if I can't do it right then, that I have those ideas kind of stored up for later on. The lady, I'm gonna say this so wrong, you guys. The Lady Anstey? I don't know if that's how you say her name. I'm sorry, Lady Anstey, if I'm saying your name wrong. What inspires you and who are your favorite illustrators? Okay, story time. Okay. My favorite illustrators are, I'm going to say his name wrong, Man Arinez. He's a French illustrator. He also works for Disney. He does beautiful, beautiful watercolors. And this book about fawns and unicorns, really can't go wrong there. David Peterson is also one of my favorites. He does the Mouse Guard comics. If you don't know what those are, you should check them out. They're beautiful. And Jeremy Bastian, who does the Cursed Pirate Girl. Here, let me find one of his super detailed pages. They're so nuts. Like, so nuts, you guys. So nuts. They're beautiful. Also, Arthur Rackham, like, some of those, I think they're turn of the century illustrators. Arthur Rackham is amazing. I really like John Bauer. That's what I grew up on. I grew up on Arthur Rackham's fairy books. I learned about John Bauer a little later on in my life. There's also Edmond Dulac, who does beautiful work. Sweetly Dark Art asks, why do you ink your art before you color it? Personal preference. But there's some things, like my sketches are super messy. And so it's nice to just go in there with ink and get them all refined up and then be able to erase the lines. All those lines, because those will show through watercolors. Sometimes I get so excited to ink, I cannot wait, and I just end up starting to ink it before I've even finished drawing. I really like inking. And then 3, I have noticed that if I ink after I've watercolored, my little markers that I like to use bleed a little bit, and I don't like that. Durbian 0328, probably said that one wrong too, asks, how do you deal with mental distractions and lazy moments? This is a really good one, and there was kind of a theme asking about art block, and so I think I will do a long video just about art block. But the short answer is I just draw. I know, that's terrible. But like, I have to just not care. If I'm being lazy, I'm like, I just need to make some art. I haven't made art for a couple days. Then I will like take a picture of my dog or my horse or whatever and just draw it. Just so that I'm doing something. And that usually gets me back in the mode of wanting to draw. Because here we go. Maddie Wilson asks, how do you deal with art block? Was it hard finding your niche and your style? So, I just draw. Also, I like to analyze where my art block is coming from. If I'm burnt out, sometimes taking a break, going on a walk, petting your dog, just doing something other like that can help to spark new ideas so that you can make more art. But yeah, I want to make a whole video on art block that hopefully will be coming soon. Was it hard to find your niche and your style? It was. Yeah, and it's something that I worried about a lot when I was in school. And then I found David Peterson and I found Jeremy Bastian, and I really loved like the line work they were doing. And so I was like, you know what, I want to try this out again. And they approached line work in a way that I hadn't really thought about it before. So I just wanted to try that out again. So I did, and people online started responding to that. And so I started doing it more and started refining it more. That's how I found my niche and my style, was I just kept trying new things until something stuck. Sweet Little Wood Art asks, do you transfer your image from sketch to final paper, or do you sketch directly onto your material? Again, when I'm working for a client, I do a sketch on just a junky piece of paper so I can make all my mistakes there. And then I take a light box and I trace it onto my nicer watercolor paper. When I'm doing my own stuff, I just draw right on the paper. Typically, Casper asks, what drawing exercises do you recommend for practice or for less confident artists? Draw from life as much as you can. It's super hard, but that's probably the number one best thing that you can do. Even if you draw in a very stylized way, it can inform your style so that it improves and it gets better. Another thing is, if you're not as confident, draw in pen. Like straight in pen, no pencil underneath. And that will help you get confident, as it'll make you more confident in your line making. It'll make you more confident in what you're drawing. I do recommend just your normal ballpoint pens for doing that because they're slightly more forgiving than a micron or a multiliner. Okay, Jumblebee also asks, you have a wonderfully traditional style. Thank you. And do you have any artists or illustrators who inspired you or whose work you studied? And I kind of covered that before, so I won't do it again, but thank you, Jumblebee. Liesl Bendio Potter asks, how do you find reference and how much do you change it? Okay, I do a lot of reference finding on Pinterest. I take some of my own photos, and then I end up changing it quite a bit. So here's some reference. And here's the drawing. '42Brushes asks, do you prefer nibs and a dip pen or brushes for your line work? I have never really made friends with brushes, so I prefer nibs and dip pens. My most use is just like the Copics or the Microns because they're super easy. I can use them in bed. That's where I do a lot of my art. Don't tell anyone. How long did it take you to have over 1,000 followers? And if I remember correctly, it took me a little over a year. And 42Brushes asks, do you do this full time? Meaning, are you earning a living off of your art? And no, I'm not earning a living off of my art. I have a day job. I'm a secretary at a law firm. And I like that because it allows me to know that I can eat, know that I can pay my rent, and also it gives me the mental freedom to be able to create stuff. Well, that's it. I'm sorry if I missed a question. And if you enjoyed this, if you have more questions, please comment below, ask your questions. Please like and subscribe if you liked this video. Thank you so much for tuning in. This one's a little bit long, but yeah, thanks for plugging through it with me and spending this time with me. See you later!